So there was a debate, a topic on ESPN's Get Up that I really wanted to talk about for a little bit. And the topic of the conversation was whether or not elite offensive linemen should be prioritized over elite receivers in this upcoming draft. So you had Marcus Spears and Jeff Saturday, two former NFL players, one an offensive lineman, one a defensive lineman, and both of those guys were on Get Up to give their opinions on whether or not offensive linemen should be prioritized versus receivers. And I'll play this first clip of Jeff Saturday, what he had to say, then I'll give my thoughts on that.
The obvious answer is yes. Absolutely, it's a staple, and it should be. An offensive lineman should always take precedent over a wide receiver. You plug and play these guys. When you find a guy that you know can come in and can make a contribution to your football team, this is what it is. You can find guys later, but elite offensive linemen, listen, only so many are created, and Swagoo knows it. Size, speed, angry, we call them big skill, not little skill. Little skill's outside, Greeny. Big skill, it is a rarity, and you always take them. I love your opinion. There's no way I would try to change it.
So it seems to me that Jeff Saturday is of this mindset that, you should always take the offensive lineman over the elite receiver because the offensive lineman can go out there and play right away. He's a plug-and-play guy that you can throw out there, and he's not going to miss a beat. I guess my rebuttal to that is, receivers do the same thing. You see receivers go out there every year, and a ton of those guys are able to go out there and play and contribute and get some big snaps on really good teams. You see it every single year. We just saw it this past season with Justin Jefferson, who was a first-round pick. He wasn't the first receiver taken, but if you look at his film from LSU and see what he was able to go out there and do, he had an argument that he should have been the first receiver taken. So he was a first-round pick, went out there and was a top 5 receiver this past season, went out there and put up tremendous numbers and broke records as a rookie. Now, I know every receiver is not going to do that every year, but every offensive lineman is not going to be an all-pro offensive lineman immediately when they step out on the field. Sometimes it takes time for guys to develop. And to sit here and act like, oh, you take the elite offensive lineman, they're going to be plugged in there right away and be contributors and do good things. I think that's a stretch because we see offensive linemen fail all the time. Guys that go in the top 5, top 10. How many left tackles have we seen that have gone out there and been bust? Guys that have become journeymen, guys that aren't able to cut it at the next level. So we see it all the time with offensive linemen where those guys aren't able to go out there and play and be ready day one. We see it all the time with receivers, guys that are ready to go out there and contribute right away. Now, I'm not saying every guy has to be a Pro Bowler or an all-pro player right away, but just to act like, receivers can't plug and play either, I think is a really crazy thing to say. He also made a point that elite offensive linemen are a rarity. And I mean, yeah, that's obvious. Like, we get it, but elite anything is a rarity, whether it be a quarterback, whether it be receiver, whether it be a running back. Elite anything is rare to find, no matter how you cut it or slice it. So typically, the elite guys that you're finding are at the top of the draft. That's typically how it works out. That's why those guys are going at the top of the draft. So to put more value on an elite offensive lineman than an elite receiver is just kind of weird to me. And I think it's tough to find both of those guys. There's not a ton of people that can go out there and have the athletic ability and the know-how and the ability to get open. And then not only get open, but you also have to make the catch. People act like playing receiver is a easy thing that everybody can do. Well, that's not the case because half of the receivers or half the guys that were receivers are playing on the other side of the ball, and those guys are DBs. So, it's not an easy position to play, and it's tough to go out there and do it at a high level. So regardless of position, elite players are a rarity across the board. So to place more value on offensive linemen and to say that the elite offensive lineman should go over the elite receiver because of how rare they are to find, the elite guys, I just think it's nonsense because it's rare to find elite at any position across the board. And I think it's a weak argument. You could have come up with any other reason to say or to justify whether or not elite O-linemen should be taken over elite receivers, and I think the reasons he came up with were just nonsense. So when it comes to Marcus Spears, I think the point he was trying to make was that offensive linemen, you know those guys are. You should be taking those guys and drafting those guys ahead of elite receivers because you can find skill position players later on in the draft.
So the bottom line is draft the tackle that you think can protect your quarterback, and then go find weapons for your quarterback later, or you try to find guys that are hidden gems. Look, I played for the Dallas Cowboys when Miles Austin became a Pro Bowler and an All-Pro at wide receivers. You can find these guys. It's hard to find these big physical tackles that can step in day one.
And that's another argument that I think is weak, and that's what a lot of people say. You know, hey, well, you can't find offensive linemen in later rounds, but receivers, those guys are a dime a dozen. You can find those guys anywhere. Well, I think it applies to all positions. I mean, there's a ton of offensive linemen in the league right now that were later round picks. Everybody's not a first round pick. There's a ton of guys that, you know, just developed later. A ton of guys that maybe got an opportunity on another team and were able to go out there and show what they could do. You know, a guy like Wyatt Teller, who was arguably one of the best offensive linemen in the league this year. Well, he was a 5th round pick and he got cut. And, you know, he was a guy that didn't have much value, but he got an opportunity and he was able to go out there and do his thing this past season. So, yeah, you can find good skill position players. You can find good receivers later on in the draft. You also can find good offensive linemen as well. I think what the emphasis is and what the main thing should be is going out there and developing guys. So you go out there and you find a guy in the later round and you do a good job of developing him, then yeah, he's going to be a good player. But you can also go out there and draft a guy in the first round and he ends up being a bust because he's in a bad situation. He has terrible coaching and just has no opportunity to get better. So you also have those situations as well. So this stuff isn't just black and white. A lot of these things depend on a lot of different factors that these guys just aren't accounting for right now. I thought Marcus Spears made a terrible point, you know, when he brought up the Dallas Cowboys, when he played and how they found Miles Austin. He was a guy that they found in later rounds and ended up being a Pro Bowl player. And I'm just like, okay, well, that's Miles Austin. And, you know, first of all, Miles Austin, he was a good player, but we're not going to act like he was Randy Moss or anything or Julio Jones. He was never considered an elite guy. He was just a guy that was good, and he had a couple good seasons, then he quickly faded away. So I just thought that was a terrible point because for, you know, as many Miles Austins that there are out there, there's a ton of offensive linemen that were drafted in the later rounds that have come on and become good players. Like I said, Wyatt Teller, really good example of that, of a guy that I'm familiar with because he plays for the Browns. You know, he's a guy that was a 5th round pick and now he's a all pro caliber offensive lineman. So there's so many different examples that you can find out there. So I really thought that was a really bad way to try to make this point. And you had one more guy, Matt Miller, really well known in these draft circles, I guess, new to ESPN, used to work for Bleacher Report, but he also had, you know, some points, and he said he's just against drafting wide receivers, period, in the first round. And I think that's blasphemy. I think that's a very unintelligent thing to say, and I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm not trying to come at this man's intelligence. He is where he is for a reason, but, I mean, it just sounds like a very unintelligent thing to say, something that somebody that doesn't really understand the game much, sounds like something that they would say. The pass game is more important than ever, and we put a ton of value on the quarterback position for a reason. So to go out there and disservice your quarterback by not giving him the adequate talent that he needs out there at receiver, the adequate playmakers that he needs out there to put your quarterback in that position, I think is a bad thing to do. And to take the approach of, oh, we'll get guys later on in later rounds and we'll just throw those guys in there and we should be okay. I think that's stupid to say, and we see it happen every year. We just saw it with Sam Darnold in New York. You know, people say that he's still a good player. He showed some promise. He just didn't have the talent around him. Well, where's that talent? Talent that he needs is at receiver. He needed playmakers out there, and he wasn't able to have those guys to go along with having a bad offensive line. So to go out there and promote this idea that you shouldn't go out there and put playmakers and surround your quarterback with playmakers and only give them later round guys, average guys, Don't go get them any superstars. I think that's just stupid. And we see it happen all the time. And then when it does happen, these same guys complain that these teams aren't going out and getting some talent around their quarterbacks. Well, based on your approach and how you value receivers, we should never go out there and go get talented guys. We should just go get later round picks and guys that are just making a practice squad just because, you can throw those guys out there and they should be able to play. Well, that sounds good, but that's not the reality of the game. You need elite players at receiver. You need elite players at offensive line. And I think the value is pretty much equal. It all depends on what you need as a team and what your philosophy is and what you're planning on doing with those players. And I think that's the only thing that matters, not all this other nonsense that they're talking about.